jingity jing. It's Dominic the donkey.
Welcome to the Zaleski Sports Show, talking today about Marawood South boys and girls basketball. We bring in our Marawood South basketball expert, Dan Ross. Dan, let's go to the standings right away. We get a three-way tie atop of the Marawood South and the boys basketball standings. You got Marathon, Newman, Auburndale. We got a lot of weeks to sort this out, but surprised at how tight it is at the top right now?
Yeah, I'm not really too surprised. All three of the teams have serve on their home courts. Auburndale got past Newman, right, at home. I think that was last Friday. We were at the game. Newman, of course, beat Marathon in an instant classic in overtime this past Tuesday. And very early on in the season, Marathon beat Auburndale at their place. It was Marathon's first game, I think Auburndale's second game. I'm not too surprised that it's those three teams. A little bit surprised about Marathon. Talking to people around the Marathon program coming into the season, they had high expectations for the Garantula, Grant Warren, but a little bit iffy on guard play and where they're going to get scoring from. And they're shooting well enough. They're getting a considerable contributions from Grant Warren, of course. But I think everybody around the Marathon program is excited and happy with where they're at. Probably feel like they should have won Tuesday night. They were one Drew Love free throw away from upsetting Newman, right? So yeah, I mean, one loss apiece for the top three, and the other three teams are trailing behind. There's definitely a line in the sand of the haves and have-nots in the conference this year.
Yeah, we'll talk about Edgar, Assumption, and Stratford a little bit later on in this talk, but we're going to kind of focus on those top three. Auburndale, a lot of people, there are a lot of talk about Auburndale coming into the basketball season. Of those three, most would have said that's my pick to win the Marawood South. You mentioned you had a chance to watch them on Friday night as they beat a shorthanded Newman Catholic Cardinals squad. And then you're going to get a lot of Auburndale next week at their tournament. Tell us about the Auburndale Eagles this year.
Yeah, Auburndale brings back a lot of their roster. It's not surprising that preseason they were one of the favorites in the conference. Newman also brought everybody back, but the reason why people were so high on Auburndale is they finished last year's season so strong. They came from way behind to really make a push towards the top of the conference standings last year. Marathon Stratford, fantastic last year, and usually really good programs, right? Good coaching, good youth programs coming up. But Auburndale was hot. They beat everybody down the stretch. And bringing back the entire team, if anything, I think people might think that they're a little bit lower than what people would expect. They are getting good contributions. The guard play has been good enough. Weinfurter, a great outside shooter, of course. Not a lot of size inside, right? Which is a big reason why Marathon beat them early on in the season, is that they had no answer at all to Grant Warren inside. And if they're not able to take the ball to the basket, you got to rely on shooting. And as you know, shooting on the road is kind of hit or miss sometimes. So that was the story of that early season game. But if you're a fan of Auburndale, you have reason to be really excited about the season.
Take a look at some of the scoring. Alex Wilfert, Mason White Eagle, Lucas Yeski, all average double figures. You talked about Auburndale, not so much size on the inside. They keep their size on the outside, as it turns out. You mentioned Caden Weinfurter, probably about 6'4" or so. They keep him on the perimeter. Lucas Yeski, though, a big body, physical, strong player, and able to get rebounds, leads the team in rebounds. Alex Wilford, I mentioned, leads the team in assists. They got a couple guys coming off the bench. Trayton Weber, the football quarterback. So you got a football quarterback coming off the bench. You're probably going to be all right coming down the stretch. Okay, let's talk about Newman just a bit. That was a team that we saw on Tuesday. You mentioned their come from behind win. They had trailed by 7 points in that second half. Come from behind win that they eventually get over the hump of the Marathon Red Raiders in overtime. And then we were told conference player of the year from last year and an obvious player of the year candidate this year, Mason Prey. We were told 2 weeks ago he was out for 6 to 8 weeks. He came back 11 days later And he performed all right. Thoughts on Newman? They're going to head down to the Milwaukee area again this year and participate in the shootout. Just when maybe you want some of your injured guys to get some rest, you're going to play a holiday tournament next week.
Yeah, Coach Waldvogel is stuck between a rock and a hard place, right? Obviously, you don't want to sit a senior because it is their last hurrah, right? It's their last time representing the Cardinals. But if the kid says that he's good to go, the doctors are okay with it, and the parents are okay with it, then yeah, you play him. And we saw a little bit Tuesday night that he's obviously not 100%, right? And he played virtually the entire game. I think he took about 10 seconds off in overtime for an offensive defensive substitution late. And he was hobbling a little bit, but he still scored, I don't know what it was, 12, 14, 16 points, whatever it was. And most of that was from the outside. So Newman's win Tuesday night might have been something that turns their entire season around, right? You mentioned maybe being out for 6 to 8 weeks. Today, being tied for first place and having that marathon win under their belt, they have to feel like they're the best team in the conference. And I think that if they're healthy, they are the best team in the conference. Doesn't mean they're going to win it, of course. They have to travel to Marathon, and they do have Auburndale at home. But they are the most explosive team. We saw that a little bit in the second half. Mason Prey was feeling good, and that team rolls, right? When everything's cooking, they can go on 21-4 runs pretty quickly against good teams. If they want to win the conference, if they want to be successful against Milwaukee Juno and St. Mary Catholic this upcoming week, Mason Prey would have to be a big part of that. You did kind of talk about the calculus of whether or not Mason should rest maybe, or if it's going to be limited minutes. That's going to be a Coach Waldvogel decision, obviously, in conjunction with Mason and those surrounding him. But it's a really tough place. Really good exposure down in Milwaukee, and that might be part of the decision-making process as well.
Yeah, that's what that shootout is coordinated to be, is a place you can come down and college coaches can feast their eyes upon you. Of that triumvirate, that's today's word of the day for those watching.
Like it.
Yeah, I know it. Newman, the only Division 5 team, the smallest school of those three. So they have that to work through for the rest of the year. As we start to work our way down the list, Edgar comes in next on the standings. They dropped a close one at home. Still haven't got any stats from Coach Huss or Coach Schmidt. So we have nothing to say about it other than the fact that Edgar held Stratford to 14 points in the second half. And it looks like they almost came back and won. But again, if you don't tell us how it happened, here's where we are. So that's Edgar. Stratford, I just mentioned, a close win over at Edgar. They're next in the standings. And then Assumption looks like they're still trying to figure things out. If you're going to handicap those three, of those three, who would you say has got a good chance to surge as the calendar turns to 2023?
Yeah, I think probably it's Edgar. They're getting good contributions from Brett Baumgartner, right? A real big name in the Edgar area, obviously, and quarterback Tegan Strait's having a pretty good season as well. And the difference between this team and the state team of a couple years ago is that they have to rely on shooting this year, right? They don't have a lot of slashers. Obviously, they don't have a lot of all-conference players on that team like the team I think it was 2 years ago had. And it's just Edgar, Stratford, Assumption, they are a lot away from the top three. And Stratford seems like they're up and down a little bit. Edgar does as well. Assumption had Edgar against the ropes down in Wisconsin Rapids, I think 2 weeks ago now. Edgar was down by 12, I believe, with a couple of minutes left, and they went on a huge run to end that. And unfortunately for the Assumption boys, it doesn't seem like they've recovered well from that, right? It's a program that hasn't been winning a lot lately. Coach Josh Pulse did a good job with them last year, and he's doing a good job with him this year. But we mentioned on the broadcast Tuesday night that the years before that were left the cupboard pretty bare, right? And learning to win is a really tough thing. Edgar won 2 years ago. Stratford won last year. Really good program the last couple of years. They were undefeated in the COVID year, right?
Mhm.
So they have that winning tradition. And the guys on the team this year, they were freshmen or sophomores, or maybe they were in 8th grade looking up to that high school team. So they know what winning feels like. The Assumption boys don't have that feeling right now.
Talking to Dan Ross, a Marawood South basketball expert here on today's Zaleski Sports Show. I mentioned stats being sent in. It's kind of interesting. I'll let everybody draw their own conclusions. Those top 3 teams, we get flooded with stats from those top 3. The bottom 3 teams, crickets, man. It's crickets. And so, listen, you want us to help promote your team, help us out. You got to send in the stats. Even when you lose, you got to send them in. Okay, let's move now to girls basketball. I think this is a much simpler conversation. You've got the Assumption Royals in the Marawood South, and that's it.
Yeah, the Marawood South, obviously a fantastic small school conference, right? I think that everybody in the area believes that the Marawood South is the premier small school conference in the entire state. And especially on the basketball side for boys and girls. This year for the girls, just seems like it's down a little bit. And obviously this is kind of a cyclical thing, right? Every school can't be great year in, year out. The girls are playing hard, but it seems like that the skill set is just down a little bit this year compared to past years, which is an unfair comparison sometimes, right? When the conference is playing so well year in and year out, having a team that's a step back, it just looks a little bit different. And Assumption's taking advantage of that a little bit. Coach Klein, Coach Jaglinski over at Assumption have really bought into the full court press, trying to get turnovers, trying to get transition layups. They're doing a really good job with it. And it just seems like everybody else in the conference is reeling a little bit, trying to handle that on a nightly basis. I don't think that Assumption has had a game closer than 15 or 20 points in the Marawood South yet this year. And I don't see that changing a whole lot. There's not a lot of consistency, right? And a lot of times that happens in girls basketball, but it's kind of a Jekyll and Hyde thing with Newman and Edgar and even Auburndale, who was preseason projected to be a really good team. And at times these teams play really well, and then they go out and they lose the next game, and everybody kind of scratches their heads like what happened in this game? It's like, it's basketball. Like, things happen sometimes. But it's not happening to Assumption. They have, I think, a 2-game lead already in the conference, and Auburndale has some tough games coming up yet, including 2 against Assumption. Not to count Auburndale girls out yet, but they're going to have to probably sweep Assumption, and that's a really tough task this year.
Yeah, when I said what I said, people, the others in the Marawood South, Zaleski, he's mean to us. Look, Assumption state champion 2 years ago, state runner-up last year. Conference championships, they've already beat Edgar, and others are, if you want me to say something different about that conference, you have chances when you play the Assumption Royals, and those are games that people like Dan and I keep track of for sure. Okay, Dan, let's wrap it up. As I mentioned earlier, you're at the Auburndale Holiday Classic next week, doing play-by-play for some of those games. We'd like people to come up and say hi to you. I know you get overwhelmed with autographs and picture requests and all that, but tell us about how much you're looking forward to being in Auburndale next week.
Yeah, I was at the Auburndale tournament a little bit last year because we were heading down to the yearbook tournament right from there. But the organizers do a good job of getting good teams in there. And there's a lot to say about breaking up the conference season and being able to play teams from outside your area. Just a different look, especially if you have postseason aspirations, which the Auburndale boys and girls both have this year. That's an honest assumption. And once you get away from the Marawood South teams, which can be a gauntlet, seeing different teams and different styles can only help your team in the long term. Sometimes these holiday classics, they bring in 3 teams that are cupcakes and they just want to look good in front of the home crowd. And that's not the case here. It's going to be a really good tournament. I encourage everybody to watch it on Zaleski Sports. If the weather's good, please come down to the gym. They have great popcorn, right? We all know that.
And you and I believe they have the best hot dogs in concession stand food. They've got the best hot dogs anywhere.
It's
All
true.
right, Dan, have fun next week, and thanks for visiting with us today.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
Hey, jingity jing. It's Dominic the donkey. Jingity jing. The Italian Christmas donkey. La la.